Hello, and welcome to my project on employment access and salary equity for women. My name is Serena Mack, and today I will be talking about the different barriers that women face when it comes to getting equal pay and job opportunity. More specifically, this project highlights the similarities and differences between job inequality that women face in both the United States and in Russia. In order to introduce this topic, I first need to discuss the current gender disparities in employment for women. In our modern-day society, countless women face gender disparities throughout their lives. From a young age, women are subjected to confining gender roles that limit their capacities for greatness. One specific source of disparity comes in the form of employment and wage inequality. Women all around the world are denied the same opportunities as men because of how they are viewed culturally and economically. There are multiple different reasons for the current wage gap that exists for women around the world. This includes discrimination against women, confining gender roles, and the lack of a flexible working schedule. All of these factors put women at a disadvantage when it comes to the workplace. Discrimination comes in various forms in terms of this issue. Office harassment, pregnancy discrimination, and being denied promotions or raises are a few examples of the discrimination that women face in the working world. There are a few major differences that exist between men and women that influence job opportunity in our society. This includes access to education, being in positions that allow for control of schedule, and a general lack of availability of current positions for women. Current research suggests that these differences are largely due to the social norms in our culture. In recent years, the gender wage gap has caught the attention of the general public. This concept of the glass ceiling was born and describes an invisible barrier, preventing women from advancing in their professional careers. Several barriers that oppose women's progression include lack of access to high-paying jobs, being looked over for promotions, receiving lower wages, and experiencing workplace discrimination. In the following slides, I will go into more detail about the specific obstacles that women face that influence the gender wage gap. There is a long history of this issue, spanning back over the past 200 years. Women began entering the workforce in mass numbers during the Industrial Revolution as more occupations became available. During this time, a change could be seen in how society viewed women. Their gender roles slowly began to change as more employers welcomed female employees into their businesses. Between the 1970s and 2010, the wage gap in the U.S. has decreased around 20%. Showing positive progress over time. More and more women are working part-time and full-time jobs while maintaining traditional family roles as caretakers and child raisers. Most of the increase in job opportunities stems from an increased access to higher education for women that has steadily grown over the past 50 years. Currently, there's an unspoken necessity for young adults to obtain their bachelor's degrees, as this level of education has come to be expected for most entry-level jobs. In the past, women have been at a disadvantage when it comes to gaining a higher education and meeting these barriers. Current trends show a positive increase in the number of women who are attending college and obtaining their master's and bachelor's degrees. I have included some of the historically significant barriers that have prevented the closing of the wage gap in the past. One of the major obstacles I included is a continued opposition to women in the workplace due to the potential for time loss due to child raising. Potential motherhood or need for work leave discourages employers from taking on more female employees. In class, we were asked to watch the film Maternity Leave, which connects perfectly to this topic. Employers are less likely to hire women and put them in high-level positions based on the knowledge that, if the woman wanted a child or to raise a family, she'd not be able to spend as many hours dedicated to her work. This causes immense pressure on women who work hard in their occupations but also desire to have a family and children. Additionally, there are cultural influences that stem from gender norms focused on women maintaining roles in the domestic household and men making money for their families. This shared perspective on women prevents progress and the inclusion of women in the workforce on an equal basis. This issue has negative effects and implications for women who are trying to earn fair wages and have equal access to job opportunities. One of the effects that was mentioned in my research was a decline in national fertility rates. This decrease can be attributed to the necessity for women to sacrifice their family lives if they want to maintain a prosperous career. Additionally, the issue of the wage gap has impacted society as a whole in both positive and negative ways. The more attention that's paid to acknowledging this issue, the more change that can occur in social opinions towards women in the workforce, hopefully in a positive manner. As I stated at the beginning of the PowerPoint, I'm going to focus on the gender wage gap disparities for women, specifically in the United States and in Russia. Women in both locations face job inequality on a daily basis and throughout the entirety of their lives. Both nations have become highly industrialized, opening a new market for job opportunities for the populations of their countries. With the increase in job availability, there has been a historical occurrence of unequal access to these jobs for women in comparison to men. An emergence in disparities between men and women can be seen in both the US and in Russia over the past 50 years, as a consistent trend of job inequality and gender wage gap remains present. Women in both locations are impacted by this issue to varying degrees. In the following two slides, I'll provide more information on both the United States and Russia specifically in order to draw comparisons between the two. On the side of the slide, I've included the current wage gaps for comparison. In the United States, the current wage gap lies between 18 and 21% as of 2010. In Russia, the wage gap is estimated to be a little over 26% as of 2004. When focusing specifically on this issue in the United States, there are a few factors that directly influence the wage gap that are worth noting. Some of these factors include confining gender roles that implicate mothers as primary caretakers of their families. As I've spoken about in the previous slides, cultural influences play a great role in determining the opportunities that women have in society. This perspective on women devalues their worth when it comes to contributing to the working world and their country's economy. Additionally, there is a common occurrence of gender segregation and discrimination against women that occurs in the workplace. When working women are put in harmful situations at their jobs, it can be extremely damaging for the woman's mental and physical health. Women are forced to accept this treatment or find work elsewhere, adding to the immense stress of their working lives. A final factor that contributes to this issue in the US is limiting part-time or full-time positions that women are able to obtain. These occupations do not pay the same wages as men in other positions, in addition to limiting the woman's ability to progress in her career. Also, there's a lack of unionization for women in the workforce, which leaves them unable to negotiate with their employers or protest for fair wages. I have included a graphical demonstration of this wage gap on the right to illustrate the severity of this problem. The infographic breaks down the wage gap between white men and women of different ethnicities in the United States. As you can see, white men set the bar at 100% earnings due to their gender and ethnicity. For every one of the following races of women, there's a decreased trend in wages earned and an increase in the gender wage gap. As of 2018, women working full-time earned 81.6 cents for every man's dollar. This accounts for about 9,766 less dollars earned per year for women in comparison to men. Similarly to the US, when focusing on this issue in Russia, there were a few prominent factors that I found that influenced the wage gap and job inequality in a significant manner. Women who occupy the lowest social class in Russia face immense discrimination when it comes to job opportunity and wages. These women are outcasted from society and are presented with extensive opposition as they look for occupation. This is a perfect example of how strongly culture can influence women's roles in their society. Unfortunately, women in Russia who are found in the lowest social classes have little hope of growing their personal wealth and escaping from poverty. Additionally, the growing economy in Russia has provided new sources of wealth for the country. As the economy prospers, women's wages appear to remain stagnant while men's wages continually increase. This plays a key role in why the wage gap in Russia is so large. Men are being given raises and promotions as companies grow and expand, while women are being left behind. Russia's economy has recently been transformed into a market economy. What this means is that production of goods and prices are able to be decided on without any restrictions. Prices are determined by competition between privately owned businesses, allowing for immense growth and profit for companies that charge the most for their goods. This transition of economy has brought Russia great wealth, but the increase has disproportionately impacted women. The infographic that I've included on this slide illustrates the changes in wage gaps over time in comparison to the country's GDP levels. According to the visual, there have been times of increase and decrease, moderately following the trend line of Russia's GDP. The current wage gap in Russia is above 30%, making it the second largest gender wage gap of any wealthy or industrialized nation in the world. Many similarities emerged in my research for women in the US and Russia when it comes to this issue. In both of these locations, women face very similar barriers when it comes to job access and equal pay. Some cultural similarities include a shared experience of discrimination against women and a confinement to gender roles that limit women's abilities to being only caretakers of their families. Culture plays a massive role in determining the way in which a society functions. There appears to be a shared worldwide pattern of discrimination against women, which directly impacts their access to job opportunities and equal wages. Additionally, there are economic similarities between women in the US and in Russia on this issue. These include being paid lower wages and being ineligible for the same positions that men can hold. All of my research concluded with findings that women are not valued as much as men when it comes to applying and holding different job occupations. Employers' decisions when it comes to hiring women are negatively affected by the perspective that men can provide more for a business than women can, whether that be in work ethic, in time, or dedication. It is likely due to the similar obstacles that these women face in both the US and Russia that prove to prevent any progression towards job equality. Overall, Russia and the US have seen moderately similar progress when it comes to decreasing the gender wage gap. This entitles a general decrease in the wage gap over the past 50 years or so, as women gain more freedoms and opportunities for promotion in the workplace. Their shared barriers help explain the similarity in progress, or lack thereof, that has been made. When comparing the US and Russia in terms of this issue, there are also a few differences that are presented. In terms of cultural barriers, there is much harsher discrimination against women in Russia, especially those who occupy the lowest social class levels. These women are completely excluded from job opportunities and are incapable of making wages that even closely match the men in their country. More progress has been made in the US towards inclusion of women in various job positions, although improvements remain necessary. There are also a couple economic differences that I found between Russia and the US in my research. First, there is currently a larger wage gap in Russia compared to the US, 30% in comparison to 20%. This larger wage gap can be attributed to the factors that I have shared on the slide about this issue specifically in Russia. Additionally, Russia's evolving economy presents unique problems for Russian women in the workforce that women in the US do not face. Finally, there are overall differences in the progress that has been made to reduce the gender wage gap between the US and Russia. The US has seen a greater decline in its wage gap over the years, in addition to having culturally progressed more than Russia in terms of declined discrimination against women. Society in the US is more consciously aware of this problem than individuals in Russia, which contributes to the greater lengths that the US has gone to when addressing this issue. This being said, there is still much work to be done in closing the wage gap and promoting job equality for women in both countries. In order to address this issue, the general public must first be educated on the ongoing problems and be advised on their best course of action in fighting against it. Currently, there are many different advocacy organizations that work to reduce the gender wage gap and raise awareness about this issue in the US. One of the major organizations that I came upon in my research for advocacy in the US is the Gender Equality Law Center. This organization fights against gender inequality using current legislation that has been put in place in the past. Their goal is to break down legal barriers that prevent women from seeking justice when they are faced with workplace discrimination. A common problem for women is their lack of legal ability to fight back against discrimination that they face in their occupations. This group of legal advisors, a part of the Gender Equality Law Center, understands these barriers and works diligently to overcome them. One of the major documents that they use in their legal cases is the Equal Pay Act of 1963, which they provide a link to on their website. This legal document is one of the most significant regulations that has been passed regarding equal pay for men and women. I have included a hyperlink to the website in the PowerPoint for any further exploration into their work that listeners may be interested in doing. Advocacy in Russia is a very different story. While researching, I could hardly find any mention of advocacy groups in Russia that were dedicated to closing the gender wage gap. There is an extreme lack of activism in Russia for this issue, and that calls for an increase in action taken to reduce the wage gap. More citizens of this country need to be made aware of this issue so that they can feel empowered to make the necessary changes toward equality. As with all social movements and attempts for change, there are constraints that people face in the name of progress. The biggest challenge for this issue is the need to change the cultural norms surrounding how women are viewed and their place in society. More people need to become accepting of women in the workplace in order to decrease discrimination against women at an overall cultural level. This magnitude of cultural change is not something that can happen rapidly, and certainly is not something that will come easily. Additionally, there's a continued lack of legislation that enforces equality that can be used to close the wage gap. New laws need to be created that directly address this issue and make it possible for the wage gap to close. Finally, we have reached the conclusion of this presentation. To summarize, I have listed some major takeaways that I think are important to understand after listening to this presentation. The most important thing to take away from this project is that gender-based wage gaps currently exist that prevent women from being treated equally in the workplace. Women make less money in comparison to men who are in the same positions, based solely on their gender. This issue is presented in almost all countries around the world and continues to limit women's abilities for occupational success and acceptance into the workforce by society. Throughout the PowerPoint, I referenced numerous barriers that influence women's job opportunity and access to equal pay. The factors that I believe to be the most influential include ongoing discrimination against women in the workforce and a lack of access to job positions, promotions, and raises. The only way to make progress towards closing the wage gap is to eliminate gender discrimination and enforce equal opportunity in the workplace for all people. Society needs to culturally advance to a mindset that allows for individuals to view men and women as equally valuable in the workplace. In order to make this progress happen, there's a need for continued advocacy on this issue. With more awareness comes more participation, and greater change is able to happen. This includes a push for legislation that enforces equal pay and a continued awareness on this issue so that the general public does not allow for these practices to continue. This final slide includes all of the sources that I referenced in my presentation. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and I hope that I was able to impart informative knowledge on the current gender wage gap that exists around the world. Please consider doing future research into this topic and join the movement that is fighting for equal wages for all.